Welcome to the Marillion. I'm Dominic Machado, and I'm joined today by my esteemed colleagues Nick Brookes and Estelle Vasudevan. Before we get started, let's go ahead and like and subscribe to the podcast, and also to let you know that our free newsletter, where we have a link down below, please subscribe to that. We've got a lot of good content coming out. And we are really looking forward to an exciting 2024 in Sri Lanka cricket. Okay. Um, so, lot to talk about. I think the thing that we probably will want to discuss first is the upcoming Zimbabwe tour. Sri Lanka and Zimbabwe play their first ODI tomorrow morning. And so this is Sri Lanka's first international sort of outing since the World Cup. And we've got new captains. We've got Kusal Mendes in the ODI squad. We've got Wanindu Hasaranga in the T20 squad. And then we've just heard that DDS will be taking over the Test captaincy. So, Estelle, I want to start off by asking, what are you looking for in the sort of in this Zimbabwe series? What are kind of the key things that you're interested in finding out? We'll talk a little bit about the squad in a minute and the selectors, but what are the things that you're kind of interested in seeing in these upcoming matches?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be quite a competitive series because Sri Lanka, of course, coming off a really poor performance in the World Cup. And this is one of their few home series this year. So they'll be wanting to really kind of get off the mark really well. But at the same time, Zimbabwe, a really competitive team. I mean, we saw during the qualifiers, they basically had that second spot sealed. And then, I mean, Netherlands, I don't know, did some amazing work in a couple of games and were able to go past them. So they are a really competitive team. I'm very excited to see Sri Lanka's batting in the series.
Hmm.
Of course, ODIs are not going to matter until 2027. I don't know. I mean, the even if the World Cup in 2027 is going to matter at all, but um, with so little focus on ODIs, it's a good time to see a few of the younger players coming, and um, that's what I think is kind of impressed me about the selectors in that they've picked a lot of young batters
Hmm.
in this squad. They've got Nuanindu back, they've got Avishka Fernando back, Sahana Rachige, they've got Janit Lianage, and I think with Pathum Nisanka missing out, they've got Siobhan Daniel as well. So because that there isn't pressure on the ODI scene at the moment, and there isn't much focus on it. I think it's a good time to try out those players. So Sri Lanka will want to kind of maybe even experiment a little with
Hmm.
positions and see. Um, just, I mean, nothing needs to be set in stone right now, but just see where these players can fit in the side.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. So, Nick, what did you make of the selection? I think Estelle mentioned, five sort of youngish batters who have been sort of on the fringes of the team now getting a spot. Who are you excited to see, and where do you think they fit into Sri Lanka's ODI batting setup at the moment?
Yeah, I really echo Estelle. I think it was a really exciting squad, and I hope that throughout the series, they kind of embrace the spirit of experimentation,
Hmm.
and that it's less about the performances and more about seeing what bits work and what bits don't. I was surprised and really pleased to see. Well, first thing to say is Pathum Nisanka get well soon. It's never nice to see anyone going down with dengue. But I thought it was a really positive move bringing Siobhan Daniel into the squad. I think that we all probably thought that he was behind the pecking order, behind Crossplay in the pecking order, but I think Crossplay hasn't been in the runs lately. And so I hope that we see Avishka and Siobhan Daniel opening together, and then that becomes like kind of a shootout between those two guys who can do better and maintain their spot alongside Pathum in that Afghanistan series. But yeah, excited to see a lot of these guys. I've seen that Janet Lianage has been hitting some sixes in the domestic one-day tournament, so it's interesting to see if he's a guy who can come in and bat 6 and 7 and bowl some useful overs too. Likewise, these guys in the middle order, Nuanidu, Sahana Rachige. And I'm excited to see Akila back, a guy who did really well during his first time out in international cricket, and then obviously has had issues with the action and has kind of taken the long route to get back into consideration for the Sri Lanka side. And so it's really nice to see him back. And I'm interested to see what his bowling looks like. And I mean, if he can be a kind of relevant backup spinner moving forward too, because I think Wanindu and Mahesh Dikshana are obviously, going to be the go-to guys. But can Akila be a guy who's around there in case of injuries or putting pressure on that starting 11? It's a really exciting squad, and I'm really looking forward to this series. Two teams with points to prove. I think it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, I think I want to echo both of your points about it's an exciting squad. I like that it's a 17-member squad. I think there were some questions about what was this new selection committee going to do? Was it going to bring seniors back? And at least for the one-day format, it seems like they're thinking about 2027. They want to figure out what's going on. They want to figure out what options they have, and they want to see who can develop and who can come into their own. I liked hearing Upal Tharanga say, we've named Mendes captain and we hope that he's captain through the 2027 World Cup, right? Because that kind of stability. I was watching, I think it was highlights from a 2013 game between India and Sri Lanka, and half of the Indian squad is still playing. Mohammad Shami was there, Virat Kohli was there, Rohit Sharma was there. Ravi Jadeja was there, and you never see that kind of, that Sri Lankan side was completely gone. There's none of those players are still around and playing. So creating that longevity, I think, is going to be really important, and seeing that long-term vision and not going back to, okay, let's just have DDS back in the squad because he's useful and he'll be useful on this Ketarama track. And I like that he said we're only going to consider DDS for top order roles, right? Because batting him at 6 or 7, we know doesn't work. And the Sivan Daniel move, I think it's the right time to do it. We've seen Sri Lanka blood young cricketers quite early. I remember Avishka getting his debut at 19, but that was against a rampant Australia, and he had to face his first ball off of, a prime Mitchell Stark, right? So I think blooding someone like Sivan Daniel in a Zimbabwe series where there's very little to lose is a brilliant move. It's a smart move. And I'm really looking forward to see what they do and seeing how they build confidence. I'm curious what 6 and 7 will look like. Are they going to put Nuanindo at 6 because he can hit sixes, or is Jayeth Lianage going to come in at 6? Dawson Shanaka, I imagine, gets a role somewhere in there. But you'd imagine there may be a little light on the bowling front if they go with either Lianage or Nuanindo Fernando, unless Chara Thasalanka is going to bowl, a fair share of overs. Yeah, so I'm curious about how they handle the question of what power looks like down the lineup, because that was one thing we saw as lacking. Sometimes we'd get off the decent starts at the 30 over mark, but we just couldn't push the accelerator. So how we solve that problem is going to be really important. I'm excited to see Akila and Jeffrey Vandersay in the squad, at least in the short term, because I think they do provide some type of wicket taking impetus. Another thing I'm looking for is what does Wanindu Hasaranga look like coming back from injury? What kind of force is he going to be in the future? And so one thing looking at the side that I noticed is that we have Dilshan Madhushanka, Dushmantha Chamira, and Pramod Madhushan. We have 3 seamers. So as much as I'm excited about what the squad looks like, I wonder what kind of messaging that tells us about how the selectors are viewing squad composition in Sri Lanka and what the pitches are going to look like in Sri Lanka, because this is what we've talked about. So, Estelle, does it concern you that we're going to get a traditional Ketarama pitch that likely takes spin? And are you concerned that we only have 3 fast bowlers given our injury history? Do we really want to be risking Dushmantha Chamira and Dilshan Madhushanka in a series against Zimbabwe?
Yeah, that's an interesting one because there's been so much talk about pitches and, moving forward in the way we play cricket, right? And this is again another opportunity for Sri Lanka to really prepare for a World Cup in the ODI format. So they need to make sure that they make the most of it. I mean, just looking at the squad, it would seem like we likely get the slow pitches that we usually see at Kettarama, which isn't ideal in my opinion. And like you touched on, I mean, Dushmantha Chameera and Dilshan Madushanka, I would expect would be the two spearheads for Sri Lanka at the T20 World Cup this year. So I wonder if we will see some rotation. Of course, since they're playing in Sri Lanka, there would be options to bring in other players as well. I actually found it really interesting that they haven't picked Chamika Karunaratne, or actually, apart from Dasun, any other kind of medium pace all rounders, because then that would have kind of supplemented the fast bowling unit.
Yeah.
But that hasn't happened. So I mean, I'm interested to see how it goes. I mean, I don't know if the pitches are really slow, we might even see only one of Chamira or Madhushanka playing, right? So, yeah, interested to see if there is some kind of rotation, or if they use Pramod Madhushan more than, I mean, they use Madhushan throughout the series and kind of switch between Madhushanka and Chamira.
Yeah, I think you're totally right, Estelle, about rotation. We want to keep our fast bowlers fresh, and we also want to give them experience. I think that's a big part. Seeing what India has done both with their batters and their bowlers is that they're constantly bringing up people, giving them experience, doing different combinations. And now, at least in white ball cricket, we do have fast bowling depth. We do have spin bowling depth to the degree where we can play with the lineup a little bit. So I'm interested to see how they manage that going forward. Um, Nick, I wanted to ask you a little bit about the exclusions from the squad. So two names that I was kind of thinking about was Lahiru Kumara. I don't know if that's an injury related thing, may well be, and Matisha Pathirana, who seems to be in contention for the T20 squad, but not for the 50 over squad. What do you think about those two exclusions? And were there any other people that you thought should have been included in the squad that didn't make it in?
Yeah, I mean, I think as far as I know, Kumara's an injury thing, right? I don't think he's played since the England ODI. I don't think he's played at all in these List A matches. So I'm assuming that he's kind of still working his way back towards full fitness. And Patirana, I think SLC are kind of taking the approach that for the moment, let's just leave him to play T20, which I think is kind of wise for now, right? I mean, he had a tough World Cup, and obviously, he's done really well in T20 cricket, bowling at the back end of innings, whereas to bowl 10 overs in ODI cricket, you've got to bowl in different phases. You've got to have a slightly more developed, diverse arsenal. And that's something with that action that's just going to take time to build. And I mean, yeah, I think that leaving him as a T20 bowler for the time being, it makes sense, and letting him focus on that. And I hope he goes really well in these upcoming T20 series and kind of bounces back. I was just surprised, like both of you guys, that there wasn't a bit more fast bowling depth. I thought that this would have been a good series for Chamika to get some game time. And I kind of would also like to see both Benura Fernando and Asitha included in this squad. I just think like Benura, and he seems to be seen as another guy who's a T20 specialist, but being a left armer who's really tall, he offers just something slightly different. And it feels like he's had one of these kind of stuttering careers where he hasn't really had the kind of run of games for us to see enough of him, whether he can be an effective tool for Sri Lanka in this format. Yeah. And I mean, obviously, I think Asitha is now the number one guy in red ball cricket in terms of seam bowling. And yeah, he had a great T20 Asia Cup, I think it was, wasn't it? A couple of years ago, last year, 2 years ago now. And so, I mean, yeah, I thought that maybe seeing that so we get a bit more of a cycle of the fast bowlers, as you guys say, there's three of them. We'd probably expect two of them to play in all of the matches. So yeah, I would have liked a bit more fast bowling depth. And I mean, I guess the only other thing is I was slightly surprised, although as I said previously, he's been out of the runs, that they didn't go for Cruz Pule above Siobhan Daniel, just because he seemed to be kind of the next cab off the rank. But on the whole, no complaints with this squad. Interesting to see that a new panel of selectors have kind of disregarded Hemantha, who's gone from being, in the World Cup 14 to kind of out of the reckoning. But no, I think that they've done a pretty decent job with this 17. And yeah, really excited to see how they go. Interesting to see what role they envisage for Hasaranga when he's back from the batting side of things. I mean, is he going to be the new number 6? I think it would be exciting if he was. So yeah, we'll wait and see on that.
Yeah, I think just to pick up on the point about Cruz Pele there, he wasn't even included in the preliminary squad for the T20, right? So even if you say, okay, maybe not quite ready to take on the opener role in the 50 over setup, you would imagine that he would at least be around the squad for the T20 setup. And the question of Hasaranga, Nick, brings me to uh, thoughts about the captaincy, right? So we've got three big changes. We've got three new captains in three new formats, and we've got deputies for all of them. So Estelle, what did you make of the captaincy changes? Do you think they're good moves? And what do you think we will see? And especially since we're dealing with white ball cricket, what do you think we'll see from Kusal Mendes and Wainindu Hasaranga as captains?
Yeah, I think all three were kind of inevitable if you think about it. I mean, Dimut Karunaratne has been requesting to be relieved of the captaincy for a while now. He wanted to give it up at the end of the last WTC cycle. So, I mean, Dhananjay De Silva is kind of the automatic pick there as captain. I think Dasun Shanaka would have been given this 2024 World Cup as well if he didn't have such a bad
Hmm.
ODI World Cup and run up to the ODI World Cup. But overall, if you look at the past couple of years, I think from one in those side, there's definitely been a push for captaincy. You've seen him captaining in the LPL. You've seen him kind of taking on those leadership positions. If and this is an assumption, uh, I do think that captaincy was one of the reasons why he switched from the Jaffna franchise
Hmm.
because they were kind of resolved to have Thisara Pereira as captain for as long as he was available to them. So then Hasaranga was kind of forced to leave. Um, so he's kind of been there and thereabouts. I think he's had enough experience around the world. Um, and he definitely has that, you know, people talk about how the captain should be able to be picked, first of all, in the side. And with Shanaka, particularly in the ODI setup in this last kind of 6 months, he's really struggled to make it into the side on merit, right? So Hasaranga won't have that issue. Um, Also, I mean, I hope he will be back to his best when he comes back after injury. So he won't have that issue. I think he'll have the trust of the players. Be interesting to see what kind of support he gets as well, because you've got you've got kind of a settled squad, right? A core set of players who've been there for maybe 3 years now, who've kind of work their way into certain roles. I was also interested to see actually that Asalanka was named as vice captain in both
Hmm.
white ball squads. So that guy is definitely one who they're looking at as leadership potential for the future. And he's one who has captained since under 19 level, right? So he's definitely got that pedigree and stuff. Um, Kusal Mendes, I'm very curious to see because we had kind of mixed results in the World Cup, right?
Yeah.
We did see some good aggressive captaincy. He used his bowlers well in some games, but then there were times when he just sat back and let things happen. So it was kind of a mixed bag. Um, I'm sure, I mean, any kid who dreams of playing for Sri Lanka probably dreams of captaining the country, right? So they'll want to give it their all and come out with a whitewash in both series.
Yeah.
But if Mendes in particular, if they are hoping to keep him until 2027, I feel like this series is going to play a big part in kind of forming the selectors and the decision makers, forming a kind of idea of what sort of player he is and what kind of culture he can build around the team. Because I mean, when a team is winning, you always talk about good culture. And it seemed like Sri Lanka had a really good kind of team bond and spirit when we won that Asia Cup, right? But once you start losing, then it seems like all that disappears. And we saw that in the ODI World Cup. I mean, by the latter half of it, at least I felt like some of them were just wanted to
Yeah.
get it done and get back home. So it'd be that I think will be the most crucial role because again, it's not. I mean, we had a separate red ball captain and white ball captain in the last couple of years, but now it's three different players. So it'll be interesting to see how that culture develops around the side and how they kind of, particularly Hasaranga and Kusal Mendis, work together to kind of
Yeah.
bring that team culture in.
Yeah, so Nick, how do you feel about Hasaranga as captain? And you brought up Hasaranga batting at six in the ODI setup. Notably, when he was captain of Candy last year, he promoted himself to number four, and also relied heavily on Angelo Matthews, who finds himself in the preliminary squad for the T20 side. How much do you think of how much of Hasaranga's captaincy at Candy B Love do you think we're going to see replicated in the Sri Lanka T20 squad? I'd imagine the power dynamics are probably a bit different there. But can you see some of those innovations and some of those perhaps loyalties um, rearing their head in the future?
I hope that we see that same kind of swaggering, taking the bull by the horns approach that he showed at Bilal for Sri Lanka. And actually, like, I'm not a huge fan of the split white ball captaincy.
Hmm.
And I think if I was in the driver's seat, I would have made Wanindu captain in both formats. I wonder whether the fact that he isn't part of the ODI leadership group is kind of out of a fear that there might be clashes between franchise commitments and ODI series. But I mean, I just thought that what we saw from the LPL, Hasaranga was like, I'm captain, I'm going to take on a load more responsibility and I'm going to raise my game. Whereas I felt at the World Cup, we saw kind of the captaincy slightly shackle Kusal Mendes' batting, and that expression and freedom of expression which we saw in the first couple of games wasn't replicated throughout the rest of the tournament. I mean, I know it's a small sample size, but I see Kusal Mendes as such an important batter for Sri Lanka in the white ball formats moving forward that, I mean, I wonder if you want him just to go out and focus on his batting rather than, feeling like he's carrying the hopes and weights of a nation on his shoulders. So, I mean, I don't know. We'll see how it goes. I hope that Wanindu's captaincy isn't going to be like, having Angelo in his ear and that he feels like Angelo's his kind of ayah who he has to force into the side, because I don't think. As we were saying before we got on air, the three of us, we can't really see exactly what role Angelo would play if he were to come into the T20 side at this stage. It seems in white ball cricket he's more of a bowling all-rounder now than a batting all-rounder, and especially in T20 cricket, I'm not sure you want to be giving him overs. You want your best bowlers bowling, right? And you've got two spinners who you probably don't want to take overs away from, and three seamers who are, again. So yeah, in terms of that, that's something I probably hope we don't see. But I'm really excited for Hasaranga's captaincy. He's just got that swagger, which not that many Sri Lankan cricketers do. There's often a kind of diffidence, and I think of Sangakkara as someone who really bucked that trend. Obviously, Arjuna as someone who bucked that trend, and Hasaranga kind of seems to have that same just kind of innate self-confidence in his abilities, and so I'm really really excited for his tenure.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting. I would love to see Hasaranga bat himself at four. I think that opens up a lot of possibilities for this T20 side if he can do that and do, maybe not replicate what he did at Candy B Love because he'll be facing, tougher opposition at the international level. But if he can play with that swagger, take that leadership role seriously, and it was clear that he thought of himself as the man and he produced as the man. So I'm excited to see that. part of what worries me is there were these kind of I scratch your back, you scratch mine reports at the end of the LPL season that Angie and Chundamal would get back into the squad because they had sort of had Wijnandu's back at Candy. But regarding Kusal Mendes, I think it's a tricky thing. Uh, I think with his talent, one of the things that people expect is they expect him to be a Babar Azam or to be of that quality. And I just don't think that's the type of game that I don't think that's his game. I think his game is to go out and express himself and be a dominant force. He's not going to fire in every innings. We have enough evidence to say that. So I think the way you get the best out of him is you tell him, shackles are off. You play the way you want to play. We have other players who can sort of buck up the batting order. You do not need to be sort of a Swiss Army knife that plays that role of holding together the innings. I don't know if captaincy is good or bad for that. It seemed, as both of you said, that in the World Cup, as soon as he got the captaincy, he said, okay, now I need to hunker down and play longer innings. And that didn't really pan out. So we'll see. I'm interested to see what his captaincy looks like. I will say in his defense, he's captained quite well in the LPL in the past, and his teams have always performed quite well. So it seems culturally he's done a pretty good job with that. So I don't know how it'll work, and I think Charith Asalanka is kind of the insurance policy there, right? He's vice captain of both sides, and if something goes wrong, maybe you unite those two captaincies under Charith and kind of provide some stability there. Um, so last question, and this is going to be kind of a fun one. Okay, so we're here January 5th, 2024. Sri Lanka has played absolutely zero matches in any format. Can I get one prediction about any aspect of Sri Lanka cricket in the year 2024 that we can kind of bank on and come back and check at the end of the year? So we'll start with you, Nick.
Oh shit! I thought you were going to start with Estelle, and I was going to have loads of on this. Shall I be like, well, now Mark's gone, shall I be resident optimist and say they're going to win the T20 World Cup? No, not quite that optimistic, but I think, okay, here we go. Sri Lanka's white ball top order, I think, is going to go through a kind of revolutionary year, and by the end of 2024 will feel as though that kind of Sri Lanka top order is better placed to fire in white ball cricket, both in T20 and ODIs, and that we're going to see the introduction of new players, the reintroduction of Avishka, and that it's going to have less of a kind of accumulatory feel and be a bit more combustive in 12 months' time.
I like it. All right, Estelle.
Okay, this is just, I mean, I have to go with like a shot in the dark. I think the Sri Lankan players picked for this year's IPL are going to do really well. I think after a long time, we've got a good group of players who've been picked genuinely on, they're very likely to feature in the sides, right? So yeah, I think they're going to have a really good year. Deoshan Madhushankar is obviously going to be the one to watch, but Matisha Patirana and Mahesh Theekshana for Chennai,
Yeah.
I think are going to be massive if Dhoni's going to go for another tournament win.
All right. And this is a bold one. I think Chamari will have a better year this year than she had last year. All right. I think that's all we've got. If you've made it to the end here, give us a like, give us a subscribe to the newsletter, and we'll be coming back to you next week with some news from the series and some looking forward to the rest of the year. All right. Thank you.